This video has been a long time coming. Long before this channel ever even existed, before I started watching long-form content about video games like the ones I create, before I even realized I liked watching and making retrospectives, I was watching long analysis videos about Silent Hill. It's been going on like this for years. I've seen just about every one of them from every channel you can think of, and a couple of my favorite creators who have covered the games already have even featured on this channel before, like Avalanche Reviews and Your Favorite Son. But despite that, I haven't gotten sick of them yet. Maybe it's overplayed and we don't need yet another long video talking about Silent Hill. But, well, I'm gonna make one anyway, because I love this series. No, like really, I own a physical copy of all 4 original games in both English and Japanese, so that's owning all 4 twice over. Plus the ever-coveted PS2 copy of Shattered Memories, not to mention the 4 limited edition skateboards Konami released more recently, and even a few other notable collectibles like a magazine poster from 1998 preserved and laminated, and lots of other little stuff. And with the brand being reignited like a long-lost torch in a dark cave, the franchise is starting to burn bright again. Whether or not that's good, we'll have to wait and see. But all the same, I just really love these games. And if you're like me and can't seem to get enough of the conversation surrounding them, then I hope you'll join me today as we get comfortable and talk about the first and my personal favorite entry of the series, Silent Hill. Since this video is coming out around Christmas, as you can see, we're aesthetically appropriate for the season. Snowfall, overcast skies, and a cozy little town to kick back and vacation in. I should not have to say this given the age and exhausted amount of conversation surrounding this game, but just in case, you should know there are major spoilers ahead. Normally, this is where I offer a big breakdown on the game, its development origins, how it came about, the objective history. But the fact of the matter is that you've probably heard all of that before, so I'm letting you know now this video isn't just a retrospective, it's my retrospective. So I want to offer something fresh while I talk about this game, and due to this, it'll be filled with my subjective takes and personal ideas from me. I like to talk about lore and look at things more as a world than just a product of code and polygons. So let's talk a little bit about Silent Hill. Just the name of the town can become confusing to some people, because it's set in different locations depending on the media. In the movies, it's in West Virginia, but the version of the town in the movie was supposedly inspired by a town in Pennsylvania called Centralia, and in the comics, it's vaguely described as being a day's drive away from Boston, Massachusetts. It's funny to me, in a meta way, how the exact location of the fictional town has confused people because that feels so real to the town itself, doesn't it? I mean, where is it? Where is Silent Hill? Well, a knowledgeable fan will tell you it's in the state of Maine, and they would be objectively right. Lead art director of the game, Masahiro Ito, has made several posts on X, formerly Twitter, voicing his frustration at the constant misunderstanding of audiences who think it's in Pennsylvania, due to misinformation spread throughout the internet over the years. But the correct answer, particularly for this game and the true origin of Silent Hill, is that it's in Maine. Though it is fun to consider that the town itself seems to have that effect on making it hard for people to definitively pinpoint. So what is this unsuspecting little town in Maine? Well, I think the back of the case sums it up perfectly. Every town has its secrets, some are just darker than others. Yes, Silent Hill is home to some very dark secrets hiding just beneath the surface of its tourist getaway veneer. Your mind is probably jumping to the monsters, otherworld, and paranormal horrors, but that's not what I'm talking about. Even outside of the alternate dimensions of the fog and other worlds, this city is brimming with evil secrets of a very real and very horrifying variety. We're talking about trafficking of hard drugs and human exploitation, not to mention the extremist cult hiding within the cracks of the town's walls, literally in some places. We're going to get to all of that in time, but first let me talk about the game itself. I'd argue that Silent Hill is the most important horror game ever made. It has constantly remained one of the most talked about and beloved franchises, not only without any real marketing or love, but in spite of its own IP owners seemingly loathing it for even existing. Something about this game just creates a sensation in people that has been nearly unreplicatable. Every time I turn around, I see another game, movie, or even band talking about how Silent Hill inspired them, or how they looked to Silent Hill for inspiration. It's gotten so frequent now that swaths of people just roll their eyes when someone else talks about Silent Hill as an inspiration yet again. Even I catch myself doing it sometimes. It may not have the kind of modern influence or swing that its heyday competitors like Resident Evil now have, but its cultural impact is seemingly unmatched in my opinion. Speaking of, when this game began development, it was supposed to be Konami's answer to Capcom's Resident Evil. It ended up being something very different. There's sort of a cult-like fandom formed around the franchise now, yet again showing a strange kind of metatextuality from the game. I see things like this every so often, where a piece of art seems to manifest simulacrums of its own pillars into real life. It's rare, but Silent Hill is one of those pieces of art I see do it sometimes. A good example is the game's very creation. It's actually kind of a legend now how the developers known as Team Silent were made up of the sort of outcast of Konami's devs, the rejects in some ways, so to speak, and the games they would develop would end up resembling them in some facets. Unique, individual, exceptional, but inaccessible, abnormal, and difficult for many to understand. I've never seen another game like Silent Hill before. Not even its own sequels are quite like the original, and they themselves re-established this trend. There really isn't any game like them either. Each entry of the trilogy is unique, not just to the franchise, but to the medium as a whole. Many reasons have been given as to why this is. I've seen breakdowns on the graphics, the controls, the hardware limitations, the voice acting, the translations from Japanese to English, the sound design, the music, the story, the timing of their release. All of it. I've heard all of the different reasons and total analysis explanations on what mechanically makes these games so unique. The cop-out answer is to say it's all of it put together or something like that. But I'm here to tell you, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know why these games are so fascinating and pull you in so well. I don't know why they're so compelling. The atmosphere alone is so infatuating that it's literally been a common trend of the fan base to gatekeep and mock people who claim to love the series but haven't ever played the games. Can you imagine that? The fan base used to make it a habit of gatekeeping its fandom to people who actually played the games. That is bizarre to me that it would even need to happen. But even more bizarre is just how prevalent and common it used to be. I can't think of another series that had as many people who loved to talk about it but not actually consume the product they seem to love to talk about so much. Things are different these days. Streaming culture has made it normal for people to love watching others play video games without playing them themselves. Even before that, you had Let's Players and the like, but now, more than ever, we have people who are totally familiar with every aspect of dozens of games without ever having played those games for themselves. But this did not used to be so common, and even back before this was such a normal thing, it always seemed to be normal to the Silent Hill franchise. I think I've ranted about the game for long enough. Let's talk about how we're playing it. Now, I'll be honest, I know my way around video game hardware, but I can't claim to be an expert. So I reached out to someone I know who is something of an expert when it comes to these things. Jared from Avalanche Reviews has an insane track record when it comes to analyzing, comparing, and testing out the capabilities of different video game ports. So when it comes to the best way to experience Silent Hill today, he's got the most reliable answers out there. Thanks for coming on board, Jared.
Sometimes, if you're lucky enough, you'll get to live through one of those moments that changed everything. And as far as video game development goes, I would argue that's exactly what I did that first cold night I rented Silent Hill from a small-town video rental joint in Tennessee. It was a mind-blowing moment for me, and I would imagine it had a similar effect on all of you because we're all here either making this video or watching it. I mean, there definitely have been other games that have tapped into deeper subject matter or told complex stories before, but until SH1, I would argue none had done it so perfectly. Its story is sort of like the narrative equivalent of getting punched in the stomach while also suffering from the worst existential panic attack you've ever had before, but in a good way. So obviously it's a game that I have a lot of love for, but it is a bittersweet kind of love as far as the rest of the franchise is concerned. Since Konami disbanded the team responsible for the first 4 entries in the series, it has been rough to say the least. Obviously, there have been a few standout titles, but I think we can all agree that using the most charitable language humanly possible, it has been very, very hit or miss. And with this recent round of Silent Hill announcements, I will admit I was sort of interested at first, but I have been burned by Konami before and in an oddly similar way. I mean, I'm not sure if anyone here has the superhuman ability to remember the 2010s, but I can recall an eerily comparable situation where seemingly out of nowhere, Konami announced several SH titles along with a few movies all at once. And judging by the new info coming out now, it seems like they're trying to one-up the shitty decisions that got this series where it is in the first place. But even in the absolute worst-case scenario, there's enough great content in this franchise to keep us depressed and doubting our own reality for years to come. But you don't have the port comparison guy hijack your YouTube channel just to talk about Silent Hill's emotional impact and try to predict its future. So how about we drill into the different ways you could play that PS1 horror classic? First up, and most obvious, is the platform it was created for, the PS1, which, surprise surprise, is my favorite, but I imagine the amount of people who keep Sony's first PlayStation at arm's reach and hooked up to their HD TV is pretty low, so if you're looking for a more convenient and cost-effective way to psychologically scar yourself, try using an old PS3. A lot of people seem to not know this, but unlike PS2 backwards compatibility, every revision of the PS3 can play PS1 discs on top of digital versions downloaded from the PSN. So when you think about it, you have 2 options in playing Silent Hill when it comes to real hardware. I will admit the PS3 scaling of PS1 video to 1080p is much softer than I typically prefer, but you really can't beat the idea of having a free upscaler just sitting in your closet collecting dust. And from a convenience perspective, you really can't discount being able to use a wireless controller to explore the foggy town of Silent Hill. If you don't have a PS3 or you like your games a little closer to free, you could emulate Silent Hill, and that's a great way to play it. The only thing I would suggest is doing a bit of research into which emulators or settings offer the most accurate to real hardware experience. Here's some footage of the game running on a Mister, an open-source FPGA-driven hardware emulation device that recently got a PS1 core. As you can see, it looks amazing, but more important than that, it's accurate to the exact way the game would have functioned on a real console. Everything from its video output to the time it takes to read data from a memory card, this is effectively a high-definition PS1. Sadly, as I'm sure we're all aware, Konami never saw fit to modernize this classic psychological thriller with a remaster or a PC port, so we really have no official options when it comes to conveniently playing it on a modern display. Although when you look at their work on bringing SH2 and 3 to HD consoles, we might have dodged a bullet with that one. I can't tell you I'm exactly excited for where this series is going, nevertheless the prospects of Konami actually treating the property with the respect it deserves. But if we do somehow luck into a reality where SH1 gets any kind of a modern re-release, I've gotta say, I hope it comes in the form of a remaster, specifically one that puts accuracy at the absolute tip-top of its priorities. We've already had developers take a crack at retelling the events of SH1, and forgive my negativity, but I'm not sure there's anyone outside the specific team that created it that could be trusted to bring that game to a modern platform in the form of a remake. It's a sad shame for guys like me, but right now PS1 era modern remasters are just not very common, and that's because of all the work required for fixing things like affine texture warping, poor frame rates, or other quirks that came with early 3D game development. That being said, it is something that certainly can be done and has been done well in the past, so I hope if that day ever comes, we get to see the Silent Hill that we already know and love just looking a little better on a modern TV. In the likely event that never happens, though, I'm pretty happy there are both official and user-driven options for a fresh-faced gamer to first get their hands on such an important video game. Here's hoping retro console upscaling or emulation gets to such a widely saturated point that everyone has easy access to any console's library whenever they want. That way absolute gems like Silent Hill 1 never have to get close to reaching genuine obscurity. But I think I've talked all your ears off enough for one day. If you need me, I'll be on Twitter arguing with people about whether or not Silent Hill The Room actually started development as a Silent Hill title. But now that I've effectively poisoned this video's comment section, I will see myself out.
I still have hopes of a remaster coming to all platforms, especially following the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection announcements and Konami's apparent new interest in the brand's potential. I don't know about any of the new titles. I'm aware of Konami's track record, but if we can get even a half-decent port of Silent Hill on Steam and modern consoles for new audiences to play, I'll say it was worth whatever schlock may follow. Well, with all of that being said, I think it's time we take a visit to Silent Hill. The story of Silent Hill is one experienced rather than told. What I mean by that is, even if you play through the entire game, you might still not fully understand it. Let me explain. There is an immense amount of this game's story that requires the player to explore the world, find items, pick up on details, put together threads, and read into subtext. The story is there, but the world won't tell you the full thing unless you yourself put the work in to find it. Sure, you've got a plot that you can understand by just playing the base events of the game, but you can and probably will completely overlook, I'd say roughly half of the game's actual story by doing this. Beyond the gameplay puzzles you must solve to progress, there is a bigger puzzle looming around you the entire time you play. That being the puzzle of the town.
What's that? Huh, radio. What's going on with that radio?
Our story opens with a clip of Harry and a young woman holding an infant on the side of the road before it fades into a little girl standing on the street. That baby wasn't theirs. The clip we saw was of Harry and his wife finding that baby like that on the side of the road. The little girl standing on the street is the same as that baby, just from before she was that baby. Yes, I know what I said. It'll make sense later, trust me. Harry Mason and his wife, Jody Mason, were headed to Silent Hill on vacation when they saw the little baby by the road. They stopped to verify and realized that she'd been left there on purpose. So the young couple took the baby in and named her Cheryl. Fast forward 7 years, and Harry's wife and Cheryl's adoptive mother has died of a disease. To remember his time with her and the time he found his adopted daughter, Harry decides to take Cheryl to Silent Hill on vacation. This decision changes everything. On their way to the little resort town, a motorcycle cop speeds past Harry into the dark, which causes Harry to be distracted by the sight of an abandoned motorcycle on the side of the road shortly after, before a little girl jumps out into the road, causing Harry to swing the car around wildly to avoid hitting her and crash his car. Harry wakes up, his car totaled, and his daughter is missing. So he does what anyone would in his position and starts trying to find her, which leads him right into the town of Silent Hill. This is where the game begins. We, as the player, inhabit the character of Harry Mason, a genuine everyman, way out of his element, and thrust into a situation he really had no business being involved in. A real wrench in the cogs of the corrupted machine that is Silent Hill. Not enough credit is given to Harry, I feel, for how important his character is to the series. Because of the depth and groundbreaking character narratives of later protagonists, particularly James and Heather, Harry often gets overlooked as the shallow hero from the first game who didn't seem to have a role to play. He's not haunted by the demons of his past or bearing some significant burden. He's just a man who happened to find a baby on the side of the road 7 years ago and had the compassion to take her in and raise her. Harry does not belong here, nor does he deserve the horrors he will face in the pursuit of saving his daughter, which really, isn't that beautiful in its own right? Harry pushes through some absolute nightmare fuel during the course of this game, and every time he gets to the other side of some horrific event, all he has to say is, "Have you seen a little girl?" Because after losing his wife, Cheryl is all he has left. Harry is a good man, a good father, dealt a bad hand in losing the woman he loved, and a worse one when his daughter gets lost in the worst town to be lost in. Yet even in spite of the lies he's told by Kaufman, the attempted manipulation from Dahlia, and a seemingly unwinnable scenario in being forced to fight Sybil, if you take the good ending as canon, which I think is obvious, then Harry overcomes it all. I'm not trying to hide spoilers or do slow reveals chronologically like in past videos, because I'll be talking freely about the story here. So something we need to get out of the way early right now: Harry's adopted daughter Cheryl is not a normal girl. In fact, she wasn't even born. Like so many things we see in Silent Hill, Cheryl herself was manifested into the fabric of reality by the powerful creature residing within the dark otherworld of Silent Hill. Her real name is Alessa, and she was born to Dahlia Gillespie long before the events we see. Dahlia, being a priestess for the cult known as the Order that resides in the city, actually tried to make her daughter into a harbinger with which they could use to birth their deity that they worshipped. In order to prevent this potentially apocalyptic reality, Alessa split her soul in half. One half was damned to reside within the fog world of Silent Hill. The other manifested in the real world as Cheryl, the baby Harry and Jodie found. I feel like I'm starting to talk myself in circles here. Let's get back to the plot. After chasing after a note left by Cheryl, Harry winds up in Midwich Elementary. If you're playing this for the first time, this probably seems confusing. How would Cheryl know to leave this note, and why would she run to the school? How did she even make it there? Well, we do need to keep in mind that there's something metaphysical happening right now, wherein two halves of Cheryl's existence are coming back together, and one of them is actively trying to guide Harry. I'm going to talk about all of the monsters and what they represent in a later section, don't worry. Let's just stay focused on the narrative for now. Walking into the Midwich Elementary School, we see the utterly depressing, abandoned interior. Yeah, I know you're all waiting for me to mention that the interior is inspired by the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Kindergarten Cop. But my much bigger question is, what the hell is Ben Shapiro doing in my Silent Hill game?
Yeah, this is still Konami we're talking about here.
Horrifying. Midwich is where we get our first really good look at the other world. It's also the first real look at the game's puzzle mechanics. Each puzzle is challenging but solvable, and the best part, every puzzle you'll find is unique and will take some genuine thought. These aren't just little mini games. You'll have to really pay attention to get through all of the puzzles you'll encounter. Once we get to the other world after unlocking the clock tower, we see just how drenched in darkness everything is here. This is one of those games that only looks more and more frightening and unique the more it ages. At the bottom of the school, hiding in the boiler room, is our first boss battle, a big lizard. I'll talk more about this later. We're back to the main town after leaving the school behind us, and the sounds of a church bell ringing in the distance is the only clue we have to go on for our next destination, Coming back outside to Silent Hill like this is one of my favorite parts about this game. The town is a hub world. We'll be coming back outside in between literally every level, which, for those of you who don't know, I love games with good hub worlds. I'm not a fan of big open world games because they feel like I'm stuck with giant amounts of gameplay where I'm just running around. Games with smaller, tighter-knit hub worlds to explore as you go from mission to mission is literally my favorite kind of game, and it works so well here. After reaching the Balkan Church, a very strange name for a church in my opinion, Harry meets Dahlia Gillespie for the first time. What's more interesting is that Dahlia has quickly deduced that Harry is an efficient badass, so she recognizes if she doesn't point him in the wrong direction and fast, he's going to start ruining things for her and the Order. Now at this point in the game, you as the player are supposed to have no idea who she is or what's going on. But with the amounts of videos on this franchise that are out there, I'm taking it for granted that most people watching this are already aware of the basic plot. Dahlia gives Harry something called the Flaros? That's how I'm going to pronounce it. And man, is this a weird piece of plot magic. I'm not considering Origins at all, by the way, keeping it totally Silent Hill 1 as we look at this thing. Dahlia gives Harry the Flaros in case he ends up coming into contact with Alessa, because when it activates, whatever it is, literally attacks Alessa near the end of the game, which causes her powers to go whack and create a fourth dimension that isn't the other world or the fog world. In SH1, this reality is referred to simply as nowhere. This place makes no architectural sense, being a weird amalgamation of different locations from Alessa's mind that were meaningful to her in some way. Most people probably even mistake this area for the other world given the similarities of their design and the lack of any actual distinctions from the game itself. Hell, even the explanation I'm giving you could probably be brought into question despite being mostly agreed upon. Silent Hill is arguably the worst series to care about the lore or continuity of because one half of it is so up to interpretation that it barely matters, and the other half of it was written by people who had nothing to do with the original 4 games and as such have no clue what the hell they're even doing. I've gone off track. We'll get back to nowhere later. Right now we need to make our way to the new hub area of Silent Hill Central. They really keep stepping it up too. This hub is just as interesting as the first one and equally as fun to wander around. I don't want to lead you on and make you think there's fun things to find or lots of explorable areas. There aren't. Well, not really anyway, but it's still fun to wander the area. This isn't to suggest there are not things to find in the hubs, by the way. There is one side quest in a later hub and plenty of items to come across, so if you're enjoying the atmosphere, it could be worth your time to look around. Eventually, we make our way to the Al Camilla Hospital, the second real level of the game. Hospitals are already pretty scary. The white sterilized aesthetic, the feeling of the dead and dying all around. I mean, hospitals just make a lot of people really uncomfortable. Early on, Harry's going to run into a strange man named Michael Kaufman. This character is pretty much the most important person in the game, at least as far as being important to the player. His fate will entirely determine the outcome of your playthrough, and nothing in the game even hints at this being the case. Like, I played through the game more than once without even realizing what the point of his character even was, because you can straight up beat the game without him mattering at all. You'll just get a bad ending. Well, we'll run into him later, so just keep him in mind. Here in the hospital, the player has to see this red liquid on the ground, find a plastic bottle, and scoop it up. Which is insane, but you'll need it for the good ending. I have no idea how we were expected to know that in the 90s. It's after some wandering that eventually the hospital shifts us into the other world again, and we meet another human character, Lisa Garland. This character's hiding something. In fact, they all seem to be hiding things. Can't say I blame them. Harry is, after all, just a stranger they're all encountering while literally fighting for their lives against monsters. Even still, all of them seem to give off a weird vibe, like they're really hiding something bad. The hospital level still has puzzles to accomplish, but they're not as hard as Midwich or a later level when we're in Nowhere. It's really learning the layout that's more of a challenge than any of the puzzles. The game's plot sort of takes a temporary back seat from this point as we go back to exploring until we wind up running into Sybil in an antique store. What's inside of this antique store, you ask? A few miscellaneous items, some frivolous decor, and a sacrificial altar hidden behind a wall. The whole game sort of goes wild after this in a point of no return kind of way. The whole world turns dark, and we'll be running around in the Otherworld version of Silent Hill a good bit, which honestly can get pretty freaky. There's a whole level that just takes place in the sewers, which it's honestly one of the most linear parts of the whole game, and you can get through it pretty fast. There's an optional side quest that's so easy to miss. If you don't already know about it, you're damn near guaranteed not to see it. I've played this game multiple times, and the first few I completely overlooked this mission. If you happen upon Annie's bar, a totally optional location, you can find Kaufman again and save his life. After this, he will leave shortly and forget his wallet. Harry can find it, and with it, a key to a nearby motel room and a code of some kind. This code lets us into the Indian Runner store, another optional location. Within this store is where Harry learns about the White Claudia drug, and finds a vial of the aforementioned aglafotis hidden in a motorcycle gas tank. From here, we learn that Kaufman has been involved in an underground trafficking ring distributing a hallucinogenic drug throughout the town of Silent Hill called PTV. PTV is made from an indigenous local plant called White Claudia, and it's also used to make the vials of the aglafotis we found that Kaufman seems desperate to get his hands on. It's worth noting that all of this has to be completed before you can even get either of the two good endings. You still with me? Getting involved like this makes Kaufman really mad at you as he catches you and steals the vial away. This will matter to the plot later. So it turns out Kaufman knows a lot more than he was letting on earlier. Illegal drug distribution and working in tandem with religious cults to addict the residents of Silent Hill to a hallucinogen? Looks like the town is paying him his dues. The whole town is falling apart by this point, as total disarray overtakes Silent Hill. We're in the Otherworld now, and basically running for our lives as monsters chase and pursue us relentlessly. Eventually, Harry is able to make his way to the lighthouse, where he finds Sybil again, and Dahlia hiding out. This leads us into the amusement park, where we find Sybil on a carousel possessed by something that makes her attack Harry. Seriously, she is literally out to kill you. How the player handles this situation dictates whether or not you secure the good plus ending or not. If you manage to scoop up the red liquid from the hospital, you can use it on Sybil to cure her of the parasite and thus save her life. If you do not know to do this, however, which, I have no idea how anyone was expected to figure all of this out in the 90s, you'll have to kill her. You can still get the good or bad ending this way, just not the good plus ending. Following this, we finally confront Alessa, whom Dahlia has convinced us is responsible for the evil that loosened the town. Since we've been carrying the device that Dahlia gave us back at the church for the whole game, the Flauros activates and begins to trap Alessa. This is when Dahlia reveals her plans to Harry. He was manipulated. We were manipulated by her. Since she knew Harry was the only person Alessa would allow to get close to her, she planned for Harry to find her and trap her. This causes everything to spiral out of control and sends us straight to nowhere. As we talked about before, nowhere is a sort of shattered dimension, the result of Alessa's power being thrown out of control. It is nothing and many things all at the same time, different from the other worlds we've seen so far. From here, we have to explore our way through a broken world that resembles the Alchemilla Hospital from before, and this is where we begin to learn some truly dark secrets. We find that nurse from before again, Lisa Garland, and she starts to bleed from every orifice we can see, as she slowly starts falling apart and dies right before Harry's eyes. Well, sort of. See, Lisa was dead before any of this even happened. What we're seeing here is Lisa slowly remembering that she died. Lisa was the nurse who cared for Alessa for years as she was hospitalized, and she did this in return for a drug, the same drug Kaufman has been spreading, PTV. We discover this in the corrupted Nowhere world. In the intro video, we can see Lisa having a fight with Kaufman as she wants to quit, and also it's implied that Kaufman is the reason Lisa is addicted to PTV in the first place. Being a member of the Order, he was using Lisa to keep her quiet as she looked after Alessa while they prepped her for the birthing of their deity. By the way, they were keeping Alessa in the basement, trapped, tied down, and alone. Lisa kept quiet about the whole thing due to her addiction. She is nothing now but a memory manifested from Alessa's powers. Harry eventually finds a tape that explains some things and gains new information about the Order and their plans. The final confrontation awaits as Harry finally locates Dahlia and Sybil again, and beside them, a bandage-ridden girl in a wheelchair. This is the true Alessa, re-merged with Cheryl, her other half. Everything gets explained here. Dahlia talks of the fire 7 years before that she started as a way to sacrifice her daughter, Alessa, to their deity to bring about the end of the world. This is why Alessa needed to be cared for by Lisa, as the entity they worship, the creature they call God, now lived in her womb. This whole time, Alessa has been placing this so-called seal of Metatron across the town in an effort to purge Silent Hill of its own reality, and kill herself totally as a means of stopping this creature's birth. Harry, in following Dahlia's earlier instructions, prevented this, and as a result, aided in the merging of Cheryl and Alessa back into one being. This being is called the Incubator, and its purpose is probably what you're imagining: to birth the entity the Order has been calling God, and bring about the end of human existence. This really is like a Lovecraftian story, seriously. Alessa's soul re-merged into the Incubator. The deity begins again to manifest within her. Dahlia is killed before she can witness this event in full. She has so desperately tried to bring about, but before the ritual can complete, what do you know? Kaufman comes in clutch and throws the Aglaophotis at it, expelling and killing the thing before it can finish its manifestation. Well, sort of. Turns out there's one last battle that needs to happen. That's right. Harry takes on a Lovecraftian cosmic horror head-to-head with a firearm and wins. Within the Incubator is a baby. Alessa and Cheryl's soul once again reborn. Another chance for Harry to do the right thing. Grabbing her up, Harry, Sybil, and Kaufman all begin trying to escape this nightmare once and for all. And in a poetic wrap-up, Lisa's form returns and puts Kaufman down in an aggressive fervor, taking revenge for how he used her for the Order's evil by dangling PTV over her the whole time. As the otherworld collapses around our heroes, the Incubator, or rather what's left of the old Alessa, uses the last of her powers to help them escape the otherworld and find safety again. This is the good plus ending, and with this we see Harry and Sybil standing very similarly to how Harry had been standing next to his late wife when they found Cheryl 7 years ago. He's been given a second chance with this girl, and he plans to make the best of it. Wow, that is a lot to take in. Our very unlikely hero, Harry Mason, is nobody. He's an everyman, no experience or greater motivation. After losing his wife, he takes his adopted daughter to the vacation town where he found her with no idea anything like this was even possible. And when faced with this hell, he continued pushing forward. When the nightmare got worse, he didn't try to escape or flee, he just kept pushing forward, all for his daughter, the last thing he had left to live for. None of this was his fight, but who else could Alessa even count on to help her put a stop to this? The man who adopted the other half of her soul, Cheryl, is the only person she could even fathom putting her trust in. It's such an underrated story. Seriously, I guess making follow-ups so good that everyone forgets about the original is a good thing because it means the team just kept getting better, but I still feel like people are missing out on just how moving this game is. And I can definitely say it is still my favorite one. What if it didn't happen like that, though? What if things were different? Well, it just so happens that Silent Hill offers a total of 4 endings to its story to answer that what if question. There's 2 good endings and 2 bad endings, all of which I'll briefly touch on here. In the other good ending, things play out roughly the same as we discussed earlier, but without Sybil's involvement. If you don't know to gather the red liquid and use it on her during the carousel battle, Harry has no choice but to just kill her. Otherwise, everything else plays out the same, and the final cutscene shows Harry standing alone outside the town holding the baby he's just found. Most people consider this to be the true canonical ending. Then we've got the two bad endings. What if you do have the red liquid and use it to save Sybil, but never showed up to save Kaufman from dying, thereby not getting his help against the incubator? Well, without the Aglaophotis Kaufman uses to help against the incubator, it never rebirths Alessa's soul, and so Harry simply kills the creature and nearly dies before Sybil shakes him out of it and they escape together. It's a sad ending, but not the worst. That's the final ending. For those who didn't find and save Kaufman and never gathered the red liquid to save Sybil, they'll show up to face Dahlia and the incubator alone. Harry is forced to kill the incubator alone without the help of Kaufman to cause Alessa's rebirth, and without Sybil to save him from the collapsing otherworld. However, after Harry dies here, we're shown a dead Harry sitting in his vehicle, which implies everything we experienced in the game were just the final synapses from his dead or dying brain. Those are the four endings, from the best all the way to the worst. There is, however, a fifth hidden ending. After the player beats the game with the Good Plus ending, they'll be able to find something called the Channeling Stone in the convenience store on Bachman Road. From there, they have to make their way to 5 separate locations where they use the stone. The otherworld variations of Midwich Elementary Roof and Alchemilla Hospital Gate, the boat before you get to the lighthouse, and then the lighthouse roof. Once all of these variables are complete, Harry will summon a group of alien UFOs to come down. From there, the aliens will interact briefly with Harry as he asks if they've seen his daughter, and they shoot him in response before taking him aboard their ship and flying away. And that's all there is to Team Silent's Silent Hill for the Sony PlayStation. A genuine horror masterpiece, and one of the most influential horror games of all time.
What's this? Oh. Oh.
Let's talk about breaking the fabric of reality. We technically see 4 different dimensions across our time with Silent Hill, although most prominently, we see just 2 of them. The first of which we really only see in the opening cutscene of the game, and that's the real world, standard fare, our dimension, if you will. After crashing, Harry wakes up in what is known as the Fog World. The Fog World is sort of like a mirror dimension to our own. This is when and where we will see monsters appear, and I think where the entity the cult calls God can exercise its supernatural powers to a degree. I guess we can think of it like a bridge between the real world and the other world, which is the third dimension we see in the game. This one is a little harder to describe. It's definitely like a deeper layer of reality. Further down the rabbit hole, if you will. It mirrors the Fog World, although not one-to-one, with the exception of being significantly more disturbing. It's as if all of the worst and most negative emotions and ideas of reality have been building within an alternate reality parallel to our own, and everything bright in our world is twisted and macabre here. This is also where the entity itself seems to reside, which is another reason I called the Fog World something of a bridge dimension. Because you seem to need to be there first before you can enter the other world, where the fibers of reality seem to peel away in front of you, replaced with a more gruesome image of the same world you were just seeing. It's one of the most iconic aspects of the franchise, and very well executed within the confines of the first game. Then we have our fourth dimension, which we've already talked about a good bit. Nowhere. Nowhere, or simply unknown in the Japanese release, is the result of Alessa's mind breaking the other world into a fragmented version of itself. It's not a mirror dimension, but rather its own internal little pocket dimension from Alessa's hurt mind after the Flauros activates and damages her. Everything is reminiscent of areas we've seen before, but yet not one-to-one, and things seem to not make sense here. It's probably one of the most underrated aspects from this title. Much of the intrigue and love the series gets is because of its exploration of these mirror realities and macabre dimensions. It's another show of just how ahead of its time Silent Hill really was. Honestly though, one of the things Silent Hill is most known for is its enemies and monsters. An enormous amount of the dialogue surrounding this game is about the different types of monsters you fight and their subsequent deeper meanings. So in my typical long-form style, we're going to analyze these creatures one by one and talk about what they mean and where they come from. One thing we know is that the town of Silent Hill, through means of the Lovecraftian deity buried beneath its streets and in other dimensions, manifests the creatures you encounter through the minds and subconsciouses of the different people in the town. In Silent Hill 2, we see manifestations from James and in some cases Laura. In Silent Hill 3, they're coming from Heather, otherwise known as... well, that's for another video. In 4, they're coming from Walter Sullivan. The town pulls from the minds of certain people to manifest its outward expressions of horror, be it in the fog world or the other world. So in Silent Hill 1, where are they coming from? Well, Alessa, of course. Poor Harry is just an everyman. He adopted a girl he found and tried to raise her as his own. There's no way he could have expected or anticipated her origins from the town. The creatures we fight have nothing to do with us. They're being spawned from Alessa. That part of the world is confirmed. That is where these creatures are coming from. So let's break them down. Again, some of this may just be playful speculation, but let me cook. We encounter the Air Screamer in the fog world, a big moth-like beast with a rough, fleshy exterior and massive wings that it uses to fly around the air, though at times it seems like it can barely hold itself up. This beast comes from what Alessa imagined a pterodon from one of her favorite books, The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame, would look like. This is actually the second creature we ever see in Silent Hill, and remains a common encounter throughout as you sprint down the streets of the foggy little town. The Groaner, as it's called, is little more than a big mutated greyhound. These things are also common to the streets of Silent Hill's deadly fog world, though their giant jaw and faster speed makes them more of a threat than the Air Screamer. The horrifying appearances of these beasts comes from Alessa's fear of them. She's afraid of dogs because she was often frightened by their barks and what she saw as their aggressive temperament. Originally known only as the Demon Children, but later officially confirmed to be called Grey Children, these entities are not only creepy, but also controversial. Appearing first when we reach Midwich Elementary, the Grey Children resemble leathery simulacrums of small children, but wield knives which they use to slash at Harry and attack him. Something else to note is that we only see these in the North American release of Silent Hill. Censors demanded their removal in the European and Japanese releases of the game due to their strong resemblance to real children. But the fact of the matter is that contextually, they are not children. They are manifestations of how Alessa viewed her classmates. They bullied her relentlessly, carving harsh notes into her desk and making her feel isolated and alone. Their knives being carried around, making her feel as though she is constantly being stabbed and attacked by the very children she shares a classroom with. Manifested from Alessa's fascination and potentially her dislike of insects, the Creeper is a creepy crawly thing that resembles multiple different insects such as a spider, cockroach, and moth all mixed into one. They're not all that dangerous, and honestly, the most interesting thing about them is that they show up again in a later entry in the series, which that's something I'll talk about in a later video. These ghostly little creatures, much like the Grey Children we talked about before, represent memories of Alessa being bullied in school. These creatures cannot be attacked in most versions of the game, as they are mostly non-threatening. They are handled differently depending on which version you play, but most versions, they aren't killable. These beasts are called the Rompers, very primal and nearly beast-like in nature. They likely represent Alessa's fear of adults due to their overwhelming and predatory stature. They are faster and stronger than Harry, and they will easily trample and pin Harry down, holding him there as they attack. This could be due to the way the members of the Order pinned Alessa down to force her into birthing their deity. Smart to just try and run from these monsters. The Puppet Nurse and the Puppet Doctor are both found in the Alchemilla Hospital and strongly resemble doctors and nurses except for the massive growth protruding out of them. They're not all that dangerous, but can overwhelm you if you're not careful while dealing with them. These monsters probably represent Alessa's fear and or hatred of hospital staff, as they were involved in her being kept alive in a hospital room for years in constant pain. The parasitic growth could either be representative of their addiction to PTV, the drug Kaufman was supplying many people in the town, or the god creature that was supposedly growing inside of her. The Night Flutter is simply a stronger version of the Air Screamer encountered in the Fog World. It is similar in design, but features a more disturbing worm-like head that some have interpreted as Harry losing his grip of sanity by this point in the game. I personally reject that theory, as I don't believe Harry's subconscious is having any effect on the town, and I don't think anyone's subconscious can affect the town until after the specific events that take place when this game ends. But that's just my personal idea about it. I could be wrong. I think this is just the same enemy as the Air Screamer, but stronger and closer in appearance to the Incubus encountered in the game's ending, as we're in the other world when we fight these, so it's in their realm. A more compelling theory is that we do see Alessa has a fascination and or fear of insects, so the worms on this one could reflect that. The worm head, much like the Night Flutter we just discussed, is simply the stronger variation of its Fog World counterpart, called the Groaner. It should look similar to you, as it's just an even more deformed variation of the canine creature. Stronger and more dangerous than the Groaner, but still pretty easy to avoid if you just run. These interesting reptilian creatures are huge, lanky, and greenish-gray in color. These really only show up in the sewers here, and I really like that they're so different from the other creatures. It's almost a bit of a shock when you first encounter them, because they crawl around above you and can attack you sometimes before you even notice. The symbolism in these is a bit harder to pinpoint, though. They could be yet another insectoid-like creature resembling crickets or locusts, or they might be something deeper. Ultimately, it's still one of the creepier monsters in the game. A more simplistic creature, however, is the Mumbler. Appearing later in the game, these hulking abominations show a massive hole in their face as they meander slowly towards Harry to attack him. It's pretty much confirmed that these things are manifestations of a fairy tale Alessa loved to read as a child. Lastly, we have the Stalker, the otherworld variation of the Grey Children. These darkened versions can actually be killed pretty easily, but much like the larval Stalker, are nearly invisible. I've seen that the speculated symbolism about these and the larval Stalkers is that the nearly harmless ones Harry encounters in Midwich represent how Alessa feels unseen and invisible to her peers, but these more dangerous versions represent to her the fear of what might happen if she is seen. So with all of the normal enemies out of the way, we still need to talk about the 4, potentially 5, altogether 6 different boss encounters you might face. The way Silent Hill handles its boss battles is a little unorthodox, but then again, what about this game isn't? The first boss creature you will have to face in your visit to Silent Hill is called the Split Head. I'll give you 3 guesses as to why this thing is called that, and the first 2 don't count. Upon entering the boiler room underneath Midwich Elementary, Harry encounters something hiding down here in an almost ritualistic chamber of a room. Its appearance is that of a large lizard, or dragon, with 4 legs, mammalian movement, and a tail. And if Harry gets too close, its entire head will simply split in half vertically and attempt to consume whatever is in front of it. In the game, Harry can actually find a fairy tale book left out and opened to a specific page about a brave archer defeating a giant lizard. I think this was done on purpose by Alessa, hoping to help Harry conquer the beast by giving away its vulnerability. When Harry activates the boiler underneath the school, a loud noise is made, and the Split Head makes that same loud noise when Harry encounters it. This leads us to believe that when Alessa would hear the boiler activate under the school, it would make her think of the creature from her favorite fairy tale book, and maybe imagine that it could even live down there. Because of this, the beast was manifested in the exact location she thought it might be, and with the same warning shriek that she heard from the boiler. It's the first boss of the entire franchise, and sets the standard for how manifestation of the subconscious into the fog and other worlds functions within the Silent Hill universe. I love this boss, honestly, but there are others to cover, so let's get to it. The second boss battle we have to overcome is called the Twin Feeler, and it's basically just a big caterpillar monster. Harry has to fight as it hides under the sand of an exposed ground, but the fight overall is pretty easy. There's a lot of speculation about the giant larva representing Alessa as being a vessel for the birthing of the deity creature called God by the Order, or even how it represents the stalled power within Alessa after splitting her soul. I, however, think it just goes back to her fear of insects, as we even see things like this in her room later in the game. This is also only the first stage of this creature's lifespan as a boss, and will come back later and act as the game's third boss as well. That third boss being the Float Stinger. Shortly after Harry fights off the twin feeler and it flees, Harry finds it again on top of a roof, now hatched from its larval state into a large moth-like creature. It's a little more challenging to tackle in this form, but can be overcome quickly if you've been frugal with your ammo up to this point. There's not a lot to say about this one symbolically, as it very clearly is just the manifestation of an insect from Alessa's room. I can tell you, however, that the track we hear during this fight sequence, called I'll Kill You by Akira Yamaoka, is a complete banger. The next one is kind of a boss, kind of not. Our police friend Sybil Bennett becomes infected by the same parasites we talked about earlier, controlling the medical staff at Alchemilla Hospital. This makes her highly aggressive, except her health is much higher than them, being equivalent to that of the previous monsters like the Float Stinger. She's hunched over with red eyes, but since she was recently infected, the growth has not yet begun protruding out of her like with the medical staff. Killing her is pretty difficult actually, as she can deal an immense amount of damage if she's able to shoot Harry. However, earlier when I said she's only kind of a boss battle, what I meant was that you can instantly skip right past this battle by using the red liquid we gather up called the Aglaophotis. Not only will doing this avoid the long battle altogether, it also ensures we get a better ending with Sybil surviving. Lastly, we need to talk about the final boss, or rather, bosses. There are two separate, mutually exclusive final bosses in Silent Hill, determined by whether or not the player has received one of the good or one of the bad endings. Let's talk about the bad and bad plus ending boss first. When Harry shows up to the end of the game having failed to save Michael Kaufman, this means that the evil deity is not expelled from within Alessa's body, meaning that its possession of her, despite seeming to appear beautiful and angelic, is in actuality evil. And so Harry is forced to kill this creature called the Incubator, which is really just the merging of Alessa's body with the interdimensional monster residing under the town of Silent Hill. After killing it, we can hear Alessa actually thanking Harry for ending her suffering as she tells him goodbye, and both her and the monster die together. This is only in the bad endings, of course, and the reference to her as the Incubator seems to imply that Harry is killing it in its premature infancy, and since even in that state it's hurling lightning bolts at him, failing this task would have probably resulted in the end of the world. In the good and good plus endings, however, we know that Kaufman throws the Aglaophotis onto the Incubator, which, just like with Sybil earlier, expels the evil from Alessa's body, separating the good from the bad. So instead of the Incubator, we fight the sheer evil of the incubus itself. And I mean, this is pretty obviously the demon Baphomet. We can all agree on that, right? The third game even makes direct reference to the Kabbalah, which is a book of Jewish magic and mysticism from the Judaic beliefs and practices. There's actually a lot of aspects and ideas around the cult called the Order in Silent Hill that tie back to ancient Jewish Kabbalist beliefs, such as the word Samael referenced by Dahlia earlier in the game, which references the Archangel of Death in Jewish mythology. Then looking at the design of the Incubator, it's very clearly the androgynous demon Baphomet. I'm not trying to get into all the details about what any of these things mean, as I could probably make an entire multi-hour long video about just the real-world mysticism in which the fantastical ideas of Silent Hill are rooted. I'm just trying to cover what's important to the creatures themselves. I do think it's pretty admirable how much research these Japanese developers did into these esoteric Middle Eastern ideas. At the end of the day, I'd call the Incubator a blend of a demon and a Lovecraftian entity. Either way, Harry puts the thing down. So something different I wanted to do for this video is have a brief section from someone who had literally never played Silent Hill before until doing so for this video. Give us his thoughts on the game briefly after finally experiencing it for the first time. A lot of the footage you've been seeing on screen was recorded by me, but even more of it was recorded by my friend Ethan during his first real playthrough of the game. So, Ethan, what was it like experiencing Silent Hill for the first time ever?
Hey everyone, Ethan here. Evan, my good friend, got me hooked on Silent Hill and even let me record the gameplay for this video. And this being my first dive into the Silent Hill universe, I've got to say that this is easily one of the top horror games that I've played. Even though I normally don't get spooked, this game definitely had its eerie moments. I think what stands out to me is the immersive atmosphere and the main character, Harry. The attention to detail in each area and the rooms just make the whole experience feel really rich and unique. Harry's journey to save his adopted daughter also adds a layer of depth, making him a protagonist that you can really connect with. Silent Hill isn't just a game, it's a well-crafted adventure that leaves a lasting impression on the player. The enemy variety is exponentially different between each area, which I really liked a lot. They never felt dull, but sometimes they threw me off because of how creepy they moved. For a game made in 1999, it felt innovative in many ways I haven't even witnessed in modern day games. Not to mention, each area of Silent Hill was enjoyable to explore, even if I got lost a few times. The elementary school and the hospital were definitely the most noteworthy areas of the game, as you spend a decent amount of time in them. As mentioned before, these areas felt handcrafted. Each room served a purpose and never felt like a copy and pasted room. There isn't much else for me to say that hasn't been said before, but this game is definitely up there with the likes of Dead Space and Resident Evil. Evan and I share a love for all of these games, and I am glad that we were able to bond over Silent Hill, as we had with the previously mentioned games.
Thank you for your input. I think a lot of us can relate to those feelings. It's important to me to really make it clear just how timeless this game is, even after all of these years. Now, I've made it a bit of a habit of talking about the cover art of these games in the end of my videos because I found I actually have some pretty strong thoughts on these kinds of things. I really love good cover art, and I think that bad cover art can be brutally damaging to a game's overall aesthetic. So we've got three vastly different covers to look at: the Japanese release, the European release, and of course the North American release. This is a beautiful cover. The dark gray overtones saturating literally every image, blackening the whole presentation, giving it a somber black and white feeling without totally desaturating the color from what we see. Harry's face is the main topic of the photo, taking up the majority of the space, but the ever-present gray color gives the feeling of a snow-laden street late at night. A street we even see in the background of the cover. Sybil's face is present in the bottom right, and we see Alessa walking down the street near a house, presumably the one she was burned nearly to death inside of. Beautiful, although a bit cluttered. I do feel like it's pretty iconic. You could pick it out instantly from a crowd of covers. It is unique, but the saturation of gray becomes both a strength and weakness when it prevents anything from really standing out past the sea of gray. A great cover with a few flaws, I feel, but totally worthy of our US release here in the States. Next up, I want to look at the European cover of the game. This cover is interesting. I like a lot of what's going on. Unfortunately, I don't feel it's really the best execution of this idea for a few reasons. What we're seeing is the obfuscated face of, I think, Alessa in her adult form, covered in a layered texture that gives it the same look and feel as the other world we encounter in the game. Again, I love this idea a lot, and the really dark vibe it's giving off is perfect for the game the consumer is about to play when looking at it. Unfortunately, Alessa's face, or it could be Lisa, is a little too obscured, and I almost thought this might be Lisa at first, but it's hard to tell who or what you're looking at, and the lack of shadow around the logo makes it really hard to read the text in some places. So what we got in the end is just sort of a mess with some hard to distinguish features. This same idea would be attempted for several later entries in the franchise, but achieved significantly better than this instance. Then lastly, we've got my favorite cover, which is found on the Japanese release of the game. I actually own physical copies of both this and the North American release, which getting was my first time seeing this cover. What we're seeing is so simple, but works so well. An off-white tile background, maybe even a bathroom floor of some kind, with a very large, bright red blood smear dragged across the floor the whole way through. We've got this little warning label, which I can't read, but honestly makes the whole thing a little uglier. The simplicity of the design, is honestly just beautiful, and I think it grabs attention. Like, whatever this is, it's about to be weird and probably scary. The logo could really stand to be bigger in my opinion since it's a little hard to read, but I don't hate it. The logo being yellow and outlined heavily in gray and blacks sets it out from the white and red background that it's plenty easy enough to read, but I do think it should have been a little bigger. So with those three in mind, the Japanese cover is my favorite, but the North American release is a really close second. Both are really beautiful, but flawed, and the European cover, despite being cool in concept, is just too weak in execution. So that's all of the cover arts. Let's get on to one of the most timeless aspects of Silent Hill, the music. Realistically, there's nothing I could say about the music of Silent Hill that hasn't already been said before in any objective sense. So what I'll do instead is talk about the influence that it's had on me. People who have been with me for a while know that I myself am actually a musician, and I write and release music under my own name, Evan Prince. I've got a full album of political satire industrial metal music out, along with several other singles and the like. Before that, I was in 2 different bands, both writing darker metal music, and Akira Yamaoka's dark Silent Hill music was always a constant influence on me, particularly this game. The noises, the ambience, the atmosphere, all things I've been chasing and taking inspiration from in nearly everything I've ever written sonically. Most people tend to credit Silent Hill 2 with the best soundtrack, and some may even say 3, but rarely will you meet someone who says Silent Hill 1 has their favorite soundtrack. It lacks the melancholic or vibey tracks of the later titles, the haunting clean guitars and tragic piano keys. Outside of 1 or 2 standout tracks, most of the music here in Harry's Silent Hill adventure is noise. I'm talking dissonant ambience mixed with what sounds like big aluminum metal barrels being smashed with hammers. It's dark, it's industrial, and it's just my favorite. The noise tracks of this game are, in my opinion, as horrifying as the music ever gets in the whole series. This is the peak of the franchise's frantic horror soundscapes. So I have found so much personal inspiration in the horrifying music of the original Silent Hill, and Akira Yamaoka is simply a blessing to the video game industry. Whatever happens with Bloober's Silent Hill 2 remake, the music is all but guaranteed to please. Well, it's certainly been a ride. I've played this game several times before, and even still, revisiting the streets of that haunted town does something to me. Stirs up emotions I can't quite explain even if I tried. When you walk down the fog-ridden streets of this abandoned little town, it can sometimes even feel like the secrets it's hiding are suffocating you. I love Silent Hill, and I have for years, but I think we've established that, so while I'm bringing on other people to tell us about their experience with the game, I've got one more guest to introduce. Near the start of this video, I mentioned how I've worked with both Avalanche Reviews and Your Favorite Son in the past, right? Well, given that both of them have inarguably the best Silent Hill content on the platform, I really wanted to invite both of them on to talk about this game, but with a touch of hindsight given the benefit of time to reflect further on the franchise since making their videos. More importantly, I wanted to ask how they're feeling about Silent Hill now with regards to Konami's resurrection campaign of the brand. We've already heard from Jared earlier in the video, so I wanted to take a minute to turn it over to Your Favorite Son. Son, you and I collaborated on a video about our predictions of the Silent Hill 2 remake earlier this year. But can you tell us what your thoughts are on the original Silent Hill since releasing your video, and what do you think about the franchise's new resurgence?
The first Silent Hill is a game that both manages to be terrifying but comfortable and inviting at the same time. This is where I think the first game excels, its atmosphere and style. I've talked about the concept of balance in horror quite often. The idea that to curate an environment for good horror to take place, you need to have both terrifying moments and moments of rest. Silent Hill does this with its presentation and design. We of course can't ignore the incredibly inviting environment that the PS1 graphics bring about. The low-poly character models, the charming but off-putting dialogue, and the foggy town that shares its name with this title. There's always going to be some nostalgia there, especially for me, playing a game that I remember fondly from my childhood on a system that practically was my childhood, is always going to carry some comfort with it. But Silent Hill manages to carry a weight at the same time, the weight of a truly terrifying experience. The static of the radio, the unnerving voice acting, and the horrific monsters that the game throws at us. All of this elevates the experience. It's something to be handled with care. This game kickstarted the franchise that would become one of my favorites of all time. It holds an incredibly special place in my heart, a place that hasn't been occupied by another horror series ever. The music, the story, the characters, they all carry that specific charm. Silent Hill is something like a perfect storm, a convergence of some of the most perfect elements, all combined to create something truly beautiful. Of course, it does have its downsides, and you can't really talk about the game without talking about the fact that it came out in 1999. But you can't deny that the game is quality. Of course, that eventually brings us to the topic of where the series stands at today. Silent Hill took quite the controversial hiatus for many years, but now it's back, right? Well, not really. After announcing 4 new games and 1 new movie, Konami just kind of dipped. Most of the projects have had complete radio silence since then. No new news on Silent Hill 2 Remake, Silent Hill F, or Silent Hill Townfall. The only project that we have seen materialize is a half-baked community choice-based narrative game, Silent Hill Ascension. This doesn't really bode well for the future of the series, and while my expectations were already on the floor for any of these projects, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence that Konami would give the IP to someone as shady as Genvid. This brings everything into question at this point, and once again, pulls the rug out from under anyone that was expecting anything good from this series moving forward. I will admit that I'm a little more cynical than most when it comes to Silent Hill. Seeing this series get dunked on over and over again for years now is pretty disheartening. But my advice when it comes to Silent Hill is, don't stand on the rug in the first place. Don't give Konami the chance to put you on your ass. Looking back at a classic game like Silent Hill, something that has just about everything going for it, and then comparing it to the most recent entry in the series, can only leave one shaking their head in disbelief. Obviously, I'm far from the first to notice or comment on this juxtaposition in quality over the years. Konami has always gotten their fair share of hate from the community, but I always really end up back at the same place. I can only really be mad about the new projects for so long before I realize that the original games still exist. Konami can't touch those memories. They can't touch these games, not truly. The first Silent Hill game will always exist as a touchstone of horror, an incredible testament to what can be done with a small budget and a passionate team, and it will always continue to inspire others to continue making good horror. Silent Hill is pretty damn great.
Well said, and thanks for stopping by. It's always a pleasure to have you on. As for Silent Hill, when it comes to playing older games, there's typically a great deal of grace needed in understanding why certain aspects don't feel very good to play. Often we attribute this to technology or lack of knowledge in the industry due to the limitations of the time period. Well, Silent Hill doesn't seem to suffer from those things, and any dated aspects seem only to have aged in its favor. The controls only make the experience more thrilling. The graphics have become even more terrifying due to the explosion of things like analog horror. The lack of prompts, tutorials, or exposition has served to garner the game an unbelievable cult-like status as an atmospheric masterpiece. Quite frankly, I can't think of an analogy to describe how well this game has aged. Often we talk about things aging like a fine wine or whiskey, to imply that they just get better the more time that passes, but Silent Hill seems to have surpassed even that idea, as its likability as a title seems to expand with every passing year, due to things even the developers could never have predicted. It's true that the majority of this game's cult icon status and retroactive fanbase was the result of its own sequel, Silent Hill 2. That being said, it's never been said that Silent Hill 1 was bad and 2 was the only one that deserved the hype. Anyone who's gone back to this original through its sequel will probably attest that it's just as, if not more, terrifying than its follow-up. Though it hasn't reached the same pop culture status of Silent Hill 2, the original Silent Hill is, in my eyes, even more deserving of the game's massive cult following, and it is, without a doubt, one of the most impressive and influential video games ever made. Ever since its release all the way back in 1999, other games and studios have been chasing what it managed to accomplish, and ended up only with pale imitations. I really don't think it's all that unreasonable to say that Silent Hill is genuinely unreplicatable. When you've got a perfect storm of circumstances and coincidences all lining up to create a product that most people, even the ones who love it, don't fully understand, replicating that is going to be nearly an impossible ask. Even its own sequels like Silent Hill 2 and 3 retained much of the same DNA that made Silent Hill, but those games are inexplicably their own thing with their own atmospheres and stories to tell in their own unique way. Sure, they're similar, but in no way do they achieve the same feelings that this one evokes. If you're not a big fan of the series, or hell, even if you are, the high praise I'm gushing and giving this game right now may seem a little much to you. Maybe that's fair, but like I said at the start, this is sort of my personal retrospective, and it very much reflects my own thoughts and feelings around this game. I love it, and I really think it's one of the most iconic and important video games ever made. I've seen and played so many other games chasing the dragon of this game's high, trying vainly to create the same or even a similar experience to what this one had. But other attempts always seem to come up short. Alessa's story is still the most tragic one of the series. A little girl born into a cult, tormented by her classmates, tortured and even eventually sacrificed by her own mother, all in the name of bringing to manifest a chaotic and definitely evil being. Expected to incubate and give birth to said entity against her will, and as a child, burned alive and kept breathing in the dingy basement of a hospital, nursed by one woman perpetually high on drugs, not being allowed to die in peace. Her only solace was the other half of her painfully split soul finding comfort with Harry and his wife, getting to experience a life of seeming normalcy, if only for a very brief 7 years before it all came crashing down on her again. Harry, an unsuspecting everyday man who lost his wife with nothing left but the daughter he adopted, fighting against terrifying monsters and incomprehensible dimensional obstacles, all to get her back, all to save his daughter. Not even his own biological child, just a baby he found and saved from the side of the road. The dark mysteries of Silent Hill run deep within its foggy streets, hiding beneath the layers of its masquerade as a harmless vacation town, waiting for the right person to touch, the right mind to manifest. Because every town has its secrets, but some are darker than others. Thank you so much, everyone, for stopping by to explore the complexities of that uncanny little town with me. I hope you've enjoyed the journey and maybe even picked up a thing or two to chew on from the whole ordeal. I'd also like to give a very special thanks to Silent Hillside for letting me use his HD footage on this video, along with Ethan, who lended me his video from his playthrough. Honestly, I don't think I could have made this video in time for this year if it hadn't been for their help, so thank you guys so much. This will be my last video of 2023, and it just feels like this is the one to end the year on. So you won't be seeing me again until 2024, but no worries, I already have multiple scripts going for some really exciting videos this upcoming year. I would encourage you to comment your own thoughts and feelings around this game below. I love seeing all of your past and experiences with the titles that I cover, and if there was ever a game I think made an impression on you, it would be this one. Of course, I'd also urge you to consider hitting the like button, as that helps me get seen by the algorithm, and subscribe to see more of my thoughts on all kinds of different older games. Who knows? Maybe it'll all bring us back around to this same little town again someday. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video, but until then, that's all I've got for you.